So today we're going to be talking about declarative infrastructure basics for system admins. And we're just going to kind of go through a little intro who I am. We're going to talk about Declarative Infrastructure 101, kind of what it is. We're going to go into Terraform and why it's so awesome. And then we're going to kind of get into a little bit of a use case here, and that's going to be GitOps, what it is and why some people are starting to look into using that in their companies here. So let's kind of start off with an introduction. My name is Tim Davis. I'm a cloud advocate with VMware Cloud Services. Before that, I was a pre-sale systems engineer in our networking and security business unit. And before that, I was an infrastructure guy. I started out taking base, phone calls for a level 1 tech support company, did that for years, ended up moving into a data center and doing server builds and things like that for the Planet, which turned into SoftLayer, which is now IBM. And then I moved over into Dell, where I ended up working my way up through to be an architect on one of their largest accounts. So I've kind of run the gamut here on jobs in the infrastructure and things like that. And then I've kind of made my way through in VMware, working more in the cloud spaces and cloud native technologies and things like that. And now I work inside of our advocacy team, trying to kind of spread the word a little more that VMware is not just a legacy infrastructure company anymore. We're doing a lot in the multi-cloud space. But today I'm not here to talk to you about VMware. I've got my Twitter here, I've got my GitHub, my Medium page, my GitLab page, and also our cloud advocacy site here, beyondvirtual.io. You can find me as VTimD pretty much anywhere on the internet at this point. So let's talk about declarative infrastructure. What is it? So declarative infrastructure is a type of infrastructure as code. And really what that is that's just meaning instead of going through and manually building pieces of your infrastructure, going through and using tools like configuration wizards where you're clicking next and clicking configurations and stuff like that, you're actually building your infrastructure based on programmatic code. Now, that's split into two different types at this point. So there's imperative or procedural, and then there's declarative, which is functional. And with that, the big difference is with declarative infrastructure, it's what should be built. And with imperative infrastructure, that's how that should be built. Now with that, with imperative, think of that like a script. The script is going to run through from top to bottom. So you're going to write it and it's going to go in order of what this should look like. I want to go through and I want to deploy a server. I want to install the operating system on it. I want to configure it as a web server. These are the kind of things that you're going to do in a step-by-step nature. With declarative infrastructure, it's just going to say, I need a web server. Now, you're going to have some extra code in there that's going to tell you what your web server should look like, but how it's built is actually going to be up to the tool that you're using to build that. Now, the big difference with this is when it comes down to how much code is actually being written for this, generally, declarative infrastructure is going to have a lot less. Because with this, a declarative, for example, with a web server, you're going to say, I need a web server. I need it to be this version of Linux, and I need it to have, the web server software on it. You get a couple of declarations with that. With your imperative, you're going to have to go through step by step for every single task that you would need to use in order to deploy that server, as opposed to just letting your declarative infrastructure tool say, okay, I know my end state looks like this. Let's just go ahead and take this task, this task, this task, and this task, and just do it all the way that we need to, the most efficiently, to make this work. Now, let's take a look in here with Terraform. Now, I went this direction, obviously, because we're here talking for HashiCorp. Terraform, at this point in time, I think is the industry standard for declarative infrastructure. That has become the one that I see the most. It's the most functional that I've found. And with this, why you should care about this as a system administrator, this is going to change the way that you do your job. Personally, from what I've seen through all of my years in the industry, the days of having a standalone systems administrator where you physically are going out and you spend your days deploying Windows, then deploying IIS roles or deploying Linux and then deploying Apache and things like that, Those are behind us. Now, there's lots of companies that are still hiring people to do that, but I don't think that's going to be a long-term strategy. People are moving into more of the automated sense. Even if you're just automating your daily tasks, most systems administrators don't really have time these days to sit there and just spin out tasks one by one by one by one. So you're going to see a lot more automation with that. And with declarative infrastructure, using Terraform and how that's going to change your job is generally going to be because it's going to make your job a lot easier. You're going to be a lot more efficient. You're going to get a lot more things done. Now, how that's going to change is rather than knowing how you're going to click through an installer over and over and over and over again, you're going to start to learn programming. Now, you don't have to be a developer, or you don't have to be some coding genius to make this work. There's so many resources out there on how you can actually learn this and do what I've done as a developer, so to speak, is steal an example that's close enough and hack through it until it works. As a systems administrator, pretty much all of us know how that game works. You're not necessarily a scripter or a coder, but you know just enough about what you're doing to be able to pull this together. This has all of my social things and stuff like that on it. And then this is the page I had for declarative infrastructure, kind of talking about declarative versus imperative and stuff like that. Then I moved into Terraform here, and we were talking about what it is, why you should care, and how does that affect your job. And where I was at it does definitely change the way that you do your job. It's going to need you to up-level your skills a little bit, and this can really help you fit into not just your existing job, but if you're looking to move to a more cloud-native company, or you're looking to kind of see how this is going to affect your role in the long term, or what your career might look like in the next 5 to 10 years. These are the kind of things that you're going to need to look into. Now, there are, of course, some alternatives to Terraform here. So anybody from HashiCorp just kind of, hold on for a second. Ansible is a big name in the industry. This is declarative infrastructure, but it is also imperative infrastructure. There's Puppet, there's SaltStack, and then we have our cloud automation services that does this as well. And in fact, we are working to be able to utilize Terraform in that as well. So why this is important, and let's talk about a use case. So there's a phrase that you might have heard before called GitOps. Now, in the industry, I've kind of seen this used a lot, and I've seen it used in a lot of different ways. And the way that I see it from everything that I've looked at, it kind of seems like it's a little bit of an overused term. GitOps was created by a company called Weaveworks. And what they mean is that their entire infrastructure operations are done where Git or GitHub is the single source of truth for their infrastructure. They are doing everything infrastructure as code. Their entire infrastructure, their operations, as it exists in production at any given point, exists in a Git repository. So with this, all of their infrastructure changes are done by pull request. And in Git, a pull request is simply saying, I want to make a change. It creates a little, offshoot. You get to pull the code out, make some changes. Once you make those infrastructure changes in your code files, you can then go ahead and run it through, check, it can do build tests. You can have approval chains and things like that to make sure that it is exactly what you want. Once everything is approved, it's checked, and it's good to go, you can actually merge that code into the master repository. And once that happens, that can actually go through and run and trigger pipelining tools to deploy that code change. So when you need to add some new servers, or you need to add a new section of your infrastructure, you're not going out into Amazon, you're not going out into Azure or Google and spinning up new instances manually. You're even not going through and running a little script that does that. What you're doing is you're making a copy of your active state code, you're making the edits that you need. So instead of 5 web servers, you need 10. You're going to go ahead and add that in there. Then you're going to submit for approval. It's going to do the checks, and it's going to run through that pipelining tool in order to push to production. Now, this is a very radical way of doing infrastructure. There's not a lot of companies out there that are truly doing 100% infrastructure as code to this level. As a sysadmin, that can kind of scare you because you would think, oh, they're just going to take my job and they're going to give it to a developer. Now, that's not necessarily the case. You are going to have to change your skills a little bit. But when it comes to making DevOps truly work in an environment, you're going to have a little bit of give and take from all of the different teams. Just as when we were making the shift from legacy infrastructure with all the different, silos over into cloud, the walls kind of broke down a little bit. You had to kind of learn. If you were a server guy, you had to kind of know how, storage worked. You had to kind of know how networking worked. Everybody, worked side by side to deliver a cohesive product. The same thing is happening with DevOps. They're kind of breaking down that ops versus development wall so that ops and development work hand in hand to cohesively deliver a solution. Now, CI/CD processes, continuous integration, continuous delivery, or continuous deployment is really, really important with this, because if you submit a code change or you submit a config change for that, it's got to go through a CI and CD pipeline. So it's going to go through and it's going to build the code together. It's going to run tests to make sure that everything works. And then it's going to go through and it's going to deploy out into your infrastructure. Now, there's lots of tools that do pipelining. And a lot of times you'll hear people say, CI/CD tool. CI/CD is really the process and procedure of it. The pipeline is the tool. Now, there's, like I said, there's tons of different products that do that. Most of the major clouds have their own pipelining tools. AWS has Code Pipeline. Azure has Azure DevOps projects with their pipelining. In cloud automation services for us, we have CodeStream. So there's lots of different ways you can do this. GitLab has their own CI/CD as well. There's so many different tools out there to help you. And really, GitOps isn't about what you use, it's how you do it. And with declarative infrastructure, since you are saving all of that infrastructure as code into your repository, what happens if your infrastructure gets blown up? Everything gets nuked. You can easily take the active state of your infrastructure as it existed at that very moment and go through and push a redeploy. Makes recovering from issues a lot easier. Now, that's at this point in time all I have. If anybody has any questions or anything like that, I'd be glad to answer them for you. So what CI/CD tools do you recommend that work well with Terraform? That's from B. Fleming. Anything, honestly. CI/CD pipelining tools these days are extremely agnostic. I've seen a lot of them that work, most of them that I've worked with work with Terraform. It all depends on how you go through and deploy it. So pretty much at this point in time, you can take your pick. If you are using like 100% of a specific cloud like AWS or Azure, using their tools are very helpful because they're very tied into the ecosystem. If you're multi-cloud, you definitely want to try to pick one that's agnostic. When I was working, I found a lot of great things in AWS's code pipeline, but I also found that if I wanted to use a third-party service in some way, in order to make that work, I had to push things over to a Lambda function or something like that to make it work, and it was really difficult. GitLab is one that I've been working with recently. They are pretty well agnostic. Their auto DevOps feature is really, really cool because you can take the pipeline, you can take your repository that all of your code is in, you put in a little YAML file inside of there, and it automatically deploys the pipeline for you and runs it anytime. It makes configuration of a pipeline really, really easy. So I highly recommend looking at that. Not that I said I wasn't going to talk about VMware, but our pipelining tool, CodeStream, makes things very, very easy because it's kind of visual. You can actually click and drag things onto a blueprint window to see what your pipeline is going to look like. So if you've never worked with pipelining tools before, it can be a lot easier than, say, a Jenkins where you're looking at all of this code that you might not necessarily understand. It's easy to visualize what the stages of that pipeline look like if you can see it. Can I post my Medium web URL again? Absolutely. Let me go ahead and share this page out one more time here. So this is going to be my Medium URL. It's at vtimd. Pretty much everywhere on the internet, I'm vtimd on most sites. And then again, our beyondvirtual.io site, this is going to be our advocacy site for our team. You're going to see a lot of cloud native, DevOps, public cloud and things like that. Our team focuses on public cloud. So things for AWS, things for Azure, things for GCP. You'll see a lot of that kind of stuff as opposed to the vSphere and the traditional infrastructure stuff that VMware is known for. In Azure deploying Windows infrastructure, what can be used for provisioning after deployment with Terraform? So when you're saying after you've deployed the Windows infrastructure, what can be used for provisioning after? Okay, so if you deploy the infrastructure with Terraform, using something from what I've seen a lot of customers doing is once you've deployed the infrastructure out for going through and doing configuration and package management and stuff like that, I've seen a lot of people use Puppet for that. So basically I've seen people go out and deploy the infrastructure with Terraform and then use Puppet for config management after the fact.